We can start. we, Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We've got my host, Neo Murabedi. We are live currently on TikTok. We are live on Riverside FM. We are live as well in Telegram and on Twitter. You are welcome to ask your questions like we have posted as the week started last week. We've got a guest speaker today where we will be discussing issues that touches everybody. It touches our lives on a day-to-day, one way or the other. We are talking parenting a child with ADHD. Let's welcome our guest speaker, Viji. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Regila and Neo, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for honoring our invite, Viji. You know, we're talking about parenting a child with ADHD, but we don't know what that is. But before you can tell us what is ADHD, what are the things to look for, because you cannot just wake up knowing that your child has ADHD. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Virginy Matsi, and I am a mother of a 17-year-old child living with ADHD. I do work in the corporate business, in the insurance sector for my day-to-day living. For fun, I enjoy hiking and being social with my friends. I do enjoy traveling as well. And I like to think that I'm an extrovert, even though it doesn't always come across that way, but I do get my energy from people. And yeah, I think that's me in a nutshell.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you. So at least we are hearing it from the horse's mouth today as to how to parent a child with ADHD. I do understand that you've got a presentation. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much, Figile. So I'm just going to project it. Okay, so good evening, everyone. So this is exactly what I'll be talking about, my experience with parenting a child with ADHD. But before we get into my story, I'm going to give you a little bit of education around ADHD, some information you may already have, but it's really just to share my perspective on living with a child that has ADHD. So I'm just going to proceed to the next slide. This is very important for me, just to put out a disclaimer that whatever I share today is not medically, it's not expert advice, okay? It's just based on my personal experience. So please, before you make any decisions, seek the advice of a medical professional because they are qualified to give you the correct information and to help you assess where you're at with your child, as well as to give you the necessary treatment. So just putting those disclaimers out there. Okay, so now what is ADHD? That's what we're going to talk about. That's first up on the agenda. Secondly, I will then share my personal parenting story, and then I'm going to just tell you what helped me personally. It may or may not help you. And finally, some economic opportunities that I've learned over time. Okay. So first of all, what is ADHD? A lot of people have a lot of different definitions for ADHD, but it is an abbreviation for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is different from ADD, so just keep that in mind. There is hyperactivity involved. And as you see there, each child experiences the condition uniquely. So not each child will manifest it in exactly the same way. And it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. Okay, so it's definitely a condition. The attributes of ADHD is in those three categories, which is hyperactivity and impulsiveness. There is inattentiveness, and then there's the combined type. So if you have hyperactivity plus inattentiveness, that is ADHD combined. So what are some of the symptoms or traits of ADHD? The common ones are poor concentration, disorganization, impulsivity, hyperactivity, mood instability, and emotional dysregulation. These are just some of the attributes of ADHD. There can be many others, and it can manifest in different ways as well. So it's important to observe your child and see how they play out these symptoms. Okay, so if I just go to my next screen, it's just important to note that when your child is ADHD, the symptoms that they have when they are younger do progress and become different during their teenage years. So they might be a little bit calmer, but there are other things that happen to them. So, for example, during the teenage years, the ADHD can be accompanied by depression and anxiety as well. So, it's very important as a parent to monitor your child, look at their behavior. If they're withdrawn and they just want to be in their room all the time, that's typical of teenagers, but when you have an ADHD teenager, you want to pay special attention to their behavior so that you can rule out all possibilities and give them the support that they need. Okay, so before I go on to my story, there are different treatments for ADHD, and usually doctors recommend a combination of treatment. Okay, so before we even go into the treatment, it's important that you get a qualified professional to diagnose your child. So don't self-diagnose based on what you see. There are psychiatrists which are qualified to give a proper assessment of your child's condition. They look at things like hereditary, they look at possible causes, they look at the behaviors of family members. There's a whole range. They conduct tests, scans, and all of that. You can also get a psychologist who is qualified to also help you determine whether your child has indeed got ADHD. So, some of the support that can be given to children with ADHD is medication, which is stimulants, and that obviously helps with the chemical balance in their brains. There are non-stimulants like vitamins, omega-3s, etc., that can help. And then antidepressants can be prescribed by a qualified doctor once again if your child shows signs of depression that's accompanying the ADHD. Non-medication based, so this is the behavior therapy if you can get them there, and that is where a psychologist or an educational psychologist comes in really handy. So that is quite important. Psychotherapy, so that they can have somebody to talk to, express themselves to, feeling safe, feeling like they are not judged when they talk to this person. This is really important. And you can also have them attend social skills training, because often they can be socially awkward. It's not that they want to be, it's just, how their brain operates. And they can attract criticism and not understand why the world is responding to them in a certain way when, they are behaving or exhibiting unusual behavior. And then there are support groups. That's probably the one thing that I haven't drawn on, but there are other communities where there are similar parents or children with the condition that share best practices. And if you're really not coping as a parent and need that kind of support, you can go to support groups like the myadhd.co.za, where you can get that kind of support as well. All right, so my story. So this is the part where I just talk about my personal experience. So that's me and my son, and he was born in 2005 to me as a single parent. So he's always had a single parent. And for the most part, in his early development, before preschool years, his development was quite normal. There was nothing obscure or unusual or anything like that. During creche, he was absolutely fine. He was a healthy, energetic boy. And it was only during his grade naught or grade R, when the teacher started observing him and just called me in to discuss certain observations that they have made, and they mentioned this thing called ADHD. Now, as a young mother, I had no idea what they were talking about. So I went home and I researched it. And at that time, I feel, there wasn't sufficient information or awareness or knowledge about it. So it was very puzzling to me. But I kept on reading about it, and they mentioned to me that I would have to get him on medication. As you can imagine, when you have a 5 or 6 year old that has to take Schedule 6 medication, that's not an easy decision to make. So, what I then did was I took the risk anyway, and I went to a qualified pediatrician. Sorry, I am just getting some feedback. Okay, I think it's stopped now. I went to a recommended pediatrician, very expensive, but he then prescribed this medication. We started off with a low dosage, and I was observing my child just to see how he's going to respond to it, feeling very guilty about giving him this medication because I've read about the side effects as well, the long-term effects, but I gave it to him because that is what he needed to be able to get through school. When he progressed to grade 1, to early primary school, he did fairly well in his schooling. Obviously, every now and then I would get called in for some behavioral problems. And I began to realize that, at a certain age, that this ADHD thing is actually real, and I did some more research around what I can do. And a lot of the recommendations that came about is changing his diet, making sure that he eats healthy, making sure that he is in the right environment, that his sleep routine is good, that his daily routine is good, that he has lots of play space and play time, etc. And so I tried my very best to ensure that he had that. And then when he was in his later years in primary school, the symptoms change slightly. And obviously, certain behavioral things like getting into fights and just other things that teachers always complain about. I was regularly called in for that, until one of the teachers actually said to me, maybe you should put him in a school where he can be accommodated for, because at that time he was in a normal public school and they didn't have the resources to be able to deal with a child that has special learning needs. So I then took him to a school that I could afford, which had smaller classes, but it's the school's personnel still didn't know how to handle children with this condition. So he was there for a little while, and he was on the medication, but he was on the medication on and off, mostly because, one, I would still feel guilty about him being on the medication, but also the medication was quite expensive. And so if you're not on a good medical plan, it can become a lot. The other thing is not just anybody can prescribe the medication. So if you need the medication, you need to go to a psychiatrist, which is very, very expensive. You can have a GP, a general practitioner, prescribe it, but often, they don't have enough knowledge to be able to treat the condition the way that a specialist like a psychiatrist would. So I was very inconsistent and probably didn't do him any justice, but also I looked at how he was responding to the medication. He actually didn't like the way it made him feel because it inhibits him. It makes him quiet in a zombie-like state. He would not be able to eat. He would get headaches. He would be nauseous. And it really just didn't make him feel good. And so often I would just then stop the medication so he could feel better. But one psychiatrist actually said to me, Mom, so if your child had diabetes, would you say that you're not going to give him the medication because he doesn't like the way it makes him feel? And then the penny dropped for me that this medication is actually very necessary to treat this condition. So I needed to make a decision to help my child realize that we are treating a condition and we are actually helping him. So I spent a lot of time trying to create a support structure for him and to make sure that he understands the reason why he needs the medication, to get the right type of medication for him specifically. So we've tested lots of different types of medication, and also to help him get alternative medication that actually balances out some of the side effects that he has from the concentration medication. So it's been quite a long journey, and I am actually fortunate that I was in a position to try all these different things before we could get to a place where I feel that we are somewhat stable in terms of the support mechanism. I have a very supportive family. My parents have been amazing in terms of understanding that this is a condition and the support that I needed. They've been absolutely phenomenal. And I've been able to obviously have a good medical aid, which has really, really helped. And so that's been really, really good. I think if I reflect back, some of the regrets I have is actually listening to the opinions of non-informed people. When your child behaves in a certain way, everybody feels like they have the answer for you based on their own parenting experiences, based on what they think is best. And some of them even dismiss the idea of this being a condition. So, with me being a young parent at that point in time, I obviously listened to what I considered wisdom, and actually it didn't do any justice to my child. So for me, make sure that you do your own self education research, make sure it's fact based, talk to the doctors, read up until you understand this condition properly. Look at your child's behavior, look at what works for them, what doesn't. Protect them, love them, make them feel loved, and create a safe space for them where they feel like they can be themselves, and show them that you believe in them. So those are things that I've learned over time, which has actually helped, but it's not been an easy journey. As you can imagine, we've had lots and lots of different challenges, and I'm also a worshiper, a spiritual person, and that part of my life has really given me a lot of strength to be able to get through the difficult times. Um, and yeah, I think just continuing to research and see what the latest is. There is new types of medications that are released every now and then. So I do keep up to date with that. It's very, very important. I know that when we started out with the medication, there are different types of medication like Ritalin. There's a slow release one, and then there's one that is given in increments. There is another version of that called Concerta, which is quite popular in previous years. And there are a couple of generics that are now available, like Newcon and Contramil and so forth. Those are all the concentration medications. There are also other types of medications. Oh, by the way, it's not limited to those. Those are just the ones that I've used for my child. And then there's also, as they get older, some medication that helps them to sleep, and just to manage their moods. like there's Zolexa, and then for any depression symptoms, there's Alexamil and so forth. But as I mentioned at the outset, make sure that you talk to your doctor and let them prescribe the medication for you, because they know the right dosage. They know when to increase and decrease the dosages. And they also give you advice around what extra support to give to your child as well. So that is my personal story. And it's not over. It's still a journey. He's a teenager now. And
Can I jump in there before you continue,
yes,
Veggie?
yes.
Thanks for that beautiful intro and your life story. Um, I don't know if it's something that you will cover when you're going forward, but one quick question. You mentioned that there's a difference between ADHD and ADD. Can ADHD at the later stage of one's life change to ADD, or you always have ADHD, HD, what am I saying?
ADHD.
ADHD forever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to have your child under the care of a doctor, because they will be able to tell you
Mm.
if your child is transitioning or not. What
Okay.
I've found and heard is, usually if your child has ADD, it's without the H.
Mm.
So they don't have that
Yeah.
hyperactivity
The
disorder or
hyperness.
that
Yeah.
need to fidget all the time or to be busy and can't sit
Yeah.
still and just needs to always be busy with something. That's the H. And the ADD is really just the attention deficit. So
Mm.
a child could be quiet and well behaved, and yet there's inattention. So it's also
Mm.
important for parents of ADD children to also observe their children and their work, and to pay attention when teachers are telling them that there's something that might need to be investigated around the child's concentration, and it gives me many different factors. So when they do the tests, they test some of the physiological stuff as well, like the child's hearing, their vision, all these kinetic mechanisms to rule out any possibilities before they make the diagnosis. So it's very important to ensure that you seek the care of a medical professional, because they'll be able to give you an accurate diagnosis. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. Well, this, I mean, your answer like covered the whole show.
Sorry.
maybe I just, maybe I just let you continue with your presentation, and we'll have questions coming in after your presentation.
Okay. So these are just some things that have helped me personally. And perhaps if somebody has gone through a similar journey, they can share what's helped them as well. But what's helped me personally is having access to medical professionals and medication. As I mentioned, it's very expensive. I recall the first time I had to see a psychiatrist, it was 4,000 Rand for the first consultation. And every consultation after that was just under 2,000 Rand. And psychiatrists, by the way, take payment up front, and you claim back from your medical aid. So, it's cash out of your pocket that you have to claim back, and often you don't get the full amount back. So it is very expensive. And the second time that I found a new psychiatrist for the first session is always the most expensive one. I paid 6,000 Rand. So, you have to save for many, many, many months. But it's worth it when you are investing in the well-being of your child. As mentioned earlier, the medication can also be very expensive, but you can put it under the chronic option. And that's why it's important to have a comprehensive medical aid option if you can. Because when you have a comprehensive medical aid option, they often do cover chronic medications, and you may find yourself paying some levies, which are not that bad because you have that comprehensive medical aid cover. So that's quite important, and that's been quite helpful for me. The self-education that I mentioned earlier. So just researching and making sure that even the medication itself, look at the ingredients in there and look at what it could mean. Look at what those side effects are, how they will manifest in your child, what they could potentially cause. And make sure that you make an informed decision around that. I do know of parents that choose not to medicate their children and go the non-medication route, and that's absolutely the right of the parent to make that decision. But obviously, we don't want to do the child an injustice. So hence I said do the self-education as much as possible. Regular contact with teachers. So the teachers, you don't even really have to prompt them or probe them. They will contact you. Your child's diary will come with red writing all the time, or you'll get a phone call to say, Miss Matsi, we are concerned about your child's behavior and progress, and then right? But also, what you can do when your child is in school is you can ask for reasonable accommodation. So this is things like letting them have extra time to write, okay? And you can have a request for their test question to be read out to them. You can request for them to write their exam in a separate venue. These are all things that you can ask for, and the teachers don't necessarily offer it, but if you can get your specialist to write a letter requesting for reasonable accommodation, the teachers have to comply with that. Okay, but it's also just important to know how your child's progressing and what extra support you can give to your child. The family support structure, as I mentioned, my family has been absolutely instrumental in that. They have just been behind me 100% of the way, and just making sure that I don't feel alone in this journey. A good routine, always good for a child with ADHD. If you get that right, it does minimize some of your problems, but obviously you want to make sure that you're consistent. Some of the recommendations get to a point where they tell you to write out a chart and literally have a step-by-step routine for your child each day. And I can say that it is definitely necessary to have something like that, because even the basics are things that they need to be reminded of. A healthy diet, especially omega rich foods and vitamins, that is absolutely healthy. And if you can include it in your diet, fish, omega rich fish, and also just good quality omega vitamins, those also do help. And then outdoor exercise, that's also very helpful when they have the H, right? The hyperactivity disorder. So that is one where they've got an abundance of energy and they just need to exert themselves. They need to just, get rid of all that energy. And so, create the space for them to be able to jump, to climb trees, to run, to do whatever it is that they need to do to get rid of this energy. And when they become teenagers, they can get into some type of sport so that they can get rid of this energy in a constructive way rather than a destructive way, because they are prone to accidents. They have low impulses. Their sense of danger is slightly less than an ordinary person. So it is important to just make sure that they have some type of exercise or structured way of getting rid of all that energy. And then reinforcing positive behavior. So ADHD children get a lot of criticism and from everywhere, right? So they often then have low self-esteem as a result. They expect the worst. So when they do something positive, it's always good to just commend them for something that they've done well, to show them appreciation and love. But it's also important to help them realize the consequences of negative behavior, so that they are also aware of the difference between the two. And then patience. So that's something you're going to need for the rest of your life as a parent of an ADHD child, because it is different than having somebody who does not have ADHD. There's a lot more that you need to understand, invest in, learn about, cope with. And so cultivating patience becomes very important, and to support your child. What has also helped, and I see a lot of these popping up recently, is the online schools. So my child is currently in an online school, and what that's helped with is for me to be able to monitor his progress, to get notifications when things are due, so that I can ensure that he submits things on time. The fact that he has the space to just be himself, and often he'll want to tap something. It could be fidgeting with something or just tapping something. And often that can be a distracting noise. And so in a classroom environment where there's other kids, it's disturbing for them. But when they're at home, they obviously have the freedom to be able to do that and still carry on. So I would say an online school is good, but ensure that it's an online school that also understands ADHD and the condition, and is able to help you with the reasonable accommodations and so forth. But there are also in-person schools or traditional schools where they do accommodate ADHD and other neurological conditions, and they have assisted learning. But often these schools are very expensive, and like really, really expensive. And so if you can't afford that, the next best thing is doing online schooling, but obviously doing your homework and your research around that. Some of the schools that I found are really helpful that are popping up now is things like the Impact School. It was traditionally a homeschooling, but now they've got an online component. You've got Cura Online, that's developing really well. And then you've got Think Digital, that's also an online school. And I forgot what's the fourth one, but they're popping up all over. Just make sure that you look at, it's actually UCT Online. So just make sure that you look at what they offer and what they're able to accommodate for your child and their learning needs as well. But it is a much more cost-effective option than to go to a school with bricks and mortar. Okay. And then finally, some economic opportunities that I've learned over time. So as you can imagine, you spend a lot of money making sure that your child is adequately supported. So as I mentioned, where you can save some money is by having a comprehensive medical aid. The temptation or the idea of having a cheaper medical aid, it might be appealing, but when you start to add up how much comes out of your pocket if you don't have comprehensive medical aid, it it may add up to a lot more than you just paying a little bit extra on a comprehensive medical aid every month. So just think about that carefully. Look at the medical aid options if you are employed permanently and you do have access to this benefit, then just make sure that you leverage that. And then the generic medication options. So those are cheaper versions of the actual medication, but also just consider what your child responds to or not. So I recall a pharmacist trying to convince me to switch to a cheaper version or generic version of the medication, and I would not have had to pay any levy fees as a result. But my child responded very poorly to that version of the medication, so I reverted back to the original medication, and I was actually willing to pay the levy so that he doesn't have those terrible side effects. So just consider that. And then the chronic medicine benefits. So again, if you have a comprehensive medical aid cover, um, get a letter from the specialist so that you can access your chronic medication benefits, because it does become cheaper and it doesn't come out of your savings, and you can then prolong your savings in your medical aid if you have that option. And then access to psychological benefits and your medical aid plan. So this is something that I actually learned this year. So my son goes to a psychologist every week. And so you can imagine it's quite expensive. And so it can deplete your savings very quickly. But the psychologist then said, okay, apply for what they call a PMB approval. And this is where she wrote a motivation for my medical aid to give me access to the PMB approval, which then meant that the psychological sessions that he has actually come out of a different benefit, which then doesn't impact on my savings. And that gives you about 15 sessions per year where it's paid out of that particular benefit. And that's actually really helped. And then also, when you do have a child with a disability and it's officially diagnosed by a psychiatrist, you can then claim back from SARS. Okay. There is a form that the doctor can fill in, and you can then put that into your SARS e-filing that you do on a yearly basis, and you can actually get a rebate for that. And you can claim not only for the medical expenses, but also if your child does go to a special school and any special provisions that you have to make to accommodate them for their disability, SARS does actually acknowledge that, and you can get a very decent rebate for that. Okay. And then the last one is around rebates from companies or for companies who employ people with disabilities. So this is also just encouraging in terms of the work or employment opportunities that exist for people with neurological disorders. So in South Africa, I haven't particularly seen a lot of programs that prepare neurologically impaired individuals for the workspace, but I do know that companies who do employ people with disabilities can actually claim back on their skills levy, and they can get a very decent rebate for employing and developing people with disabilities. So they can work, and the company just needs to, again, make reasonable accommodation for them, and ensure that they are able to cope with the work that they are doing, and also encourage people to declare their disabilities, because often people feel that they will be stigmatized, or that it will disadvantage them if they declare their disability, but actually it does the opposite. So the company is obliged to ensure that these individuals, that their working conditions are good for them, and that they can cope within the confines of their conditions. I've read some research around the UK where there's far more advanced programs that help prepare these individuals for the workplace, that help them to transition into the workplace, and that actually even give them access to employment. So I'm hoping that in South Africa we can adopt some of those practices so that it can be fair for neurologically impaired individuals to access employment as well, and to provide for themselves. And I hope to contribute to that research as well one day. So that is what I have for you in terms of my presentation. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
I've learned a lot. I thought I knew enough about ADHD until I looked at your spreadsheet. You, not spreadsheet. Look at me going spreadsheets now. Your presentation, and what really intrigued me is you could also claim for expenses for disability from SARS,
Correct.
which I never thought that could work. Um, on our connection there on Telegram, we have somebody who's in HR. I wonder if they can comment on this part. How do they deal with issues like this when there's a disability? Somebody declared disability when they started working, and the disability, has it been ADHD, other than the normal, not the normal, but what we used to as disability? Because for me, ADHD, I didn't see it as a disability until
Right.
until I hear you say. Uh, what do you think, Figile?
I was about to say the very same thing, that I never knew that ADHD is a disability, And one thing I wanted to find out from Virginie is that how will I know? You mentioned when you started your presentation that you need to keep an eye on your child's behavior, but
Yes.
oftentimes we I'm not a medical profession. And when another parent says, my child who is just hyperactive, just assumes that your child has ADHD, how do you differentiate the two?
Yeah, so that's very important. And that's why there's a lot of caution given to parents to give enough time to be able to assess whether it is just natural hyperactivity as a normal child would, or if there's more to it. And usually they use the age of 7
Mhm.
to gauge, whether an intervention is required or if an assessment needs to take place. And often because at 7 they start school and they're in an environment where the teacher can start observing their behavior relative to their peers, and if there's acute symptoms or behaviors that show up, then it can be brought to your attention by means of the teacher, like in my case.
Mhm.
But if you as a parent have concerns as well, it's also good for you to just go and look for answers, perhaps from a medical professional, but never self-diagnose.
That's where the danger is on self-diagnosing your child, because I had an incident when my daughter was still young, that she was just hyperactive, but the teachers at school assumed it was ADHD, and
Yeah.
more often, hence I asked you, how do I differentiate the two, as a mother, other than seeking professional help? Because even though the intervention is required, you mentioned how expensive that can be. I can imagine
Hmm.
taking my child to see a psychologist or psychiatrist and pay 4,000 rand just for a consult, for a doctor to tell me that no, it's a no. But I know that some
Yeah.
of the schools, a disclaimer, I'm not mentioning anybody, but I know that some schools are working with certain doctors, like psychologists, psychiatrists, and you find that they're referring more of their students to those doctors, for a long
Hmm.
period of time. I'm not saying it is wrong for a child to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, even if there's nothing wrong. But I just want to know as to how cautious can I be as a parent to say, no, you cannot refer my child to see a psychiatrist or psychologist based on 1, 2, 3. What is it that I have to look for as a parent when I get that feedback
Yeah.
from the teacher?
I can tell you my
So,
personal.
Virginie,
Yeah.
before you answer that question,
Mhm.
Figile, so when you're saying they're referring the child to the psychologist, or yeah, um, do you fit the bill,
You fit the
or
bill. You
it will
pay the
be?
bill. You pay the psychologist. You pay the psychiatrist.
Wow. Okay. All right. Veggie.
Hence, it's my
Yeah, it's
concern.
it's it's yes, it's not an easy
Yeah.
thing. And there are obviously people who can't afford it, and there are resources available, and I'll talk to that just now.
Mm.
Okay.
But Figile, just to talk to you about where you should start becoming concerned is there will be signs that your child's behavior is out of the norm, out of the ordinary. It will be in how they interact with other children.
Okay.
And you'll get feedback from multiple people as well, besides the teacher. It might be a teacher where they do the extramurals, for example. I remember that my child did gymnastics for a long time when he was younger, and the coach would talk to me about how he interacts with the other kids. He would pinch the other kids, and he just wasn't friendly with them in the classrooms. For example, he just couldn't sit still. He would climb on everything, and even when the teacher tells him to sit still, he would just struggle, right? And there are many other odd behaviors for a child that age that will start telling you that perhaps you should be concerned. So if you absolutely feel as a parent, I think I'm just getting some feedback. No, thank you. So what I would say is also, if you've tried certain things, for example, changing your child's routine, maybe not giving them sweets before bed or sugary things before bed, and you give them their omega 3s, you make sure they eat healthy, you make sure they get enough sleep, um, all the stuff around their well-being is sorted, and the behavior persists, then you have to start getting concerned as a parent, especially if you are also teaching them good values, you're teaching them the right way to behave, you're rewarding them for good behavior, and you perhaps disciplining or punishing them for incorrect behaviors, etc. Those are things that you can look at as well. And it's important, to pick it up when they're younger, because it has the potential to evolve, and I've seen it in the teenage years, into juvenile delinquency. And it makes me so sad that a lot of these juvenile delinquents very likely have this condition, but it's dismissed as exactly that, just young criminals. And yet, if they receive the necessary help, they could be good citizens in the country. So, and also for kids, when they grow up and they become teenagers, right, and they don't have the right level of support, they have the potential to self-medicate, and you don't want that, because there's some dangerous things out there, and there are people very happy to sell stuff to your kid. And for your kid, all they want to do is feel better, right? They just want to feel better, and so anything that's going to make them feel better, they're gonna take that. So, as difficult as it is as a parent, I'd say I would rather have the diagnosis done than not done. Um, you know, and some of the resources that you can access, if you can't afford psychiatrists and psychologists, etc., there's a place called Tara Hospital.
Okay.
They offer, it's a government facility, and they are in partnership with Wits University. They can offer those services. Obviously, you'll wait longer because it is a government institution, but you can at least have access to those services either for free or at a very low amount. And you can make use of, if your school does offer educational psychologists, you can make use of that. Alternatively, there's free hotlines for counseling, like the South African Depression and Anxiety Society. Those are all free services that you can access as a parent if you would not like to have or can't afford to get professional services. So it doesn't mean that if you don't have the money for it that you shouldn't be able to do something about it. You can always do something about it.
Wow. Thank you very much, Virgie.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks for that, Veggie. I was kind of hoping that in our audience would have an HR person, to comment on the workplace where they would be dealing with disability. If there is, please. I'm noting one on Telegram, but we didn't prepare her for that.
Okay.
But if she's able to comment on that, she can raise her hand and comment. And then the second question: you as a parent, Virgie, majority of your presentation, you talked about how to handle a child who's ADHD and what to do, where to go, what medication to take. How does that affect you as a parent, mentally and emotionally?
Sure. Do you have tissues?
I have some, the virtual
I
ones.
think.
No, we'll send you a better one.
Because yes, it is
Yeah.
important to know how you're feeling.
Yeah, I think it depends on your personality and your levels of stress coping capacity. So, in the way I respond to things generally is first in a practical way. So I'd always look at, what needs to be done practically. I'd want to know what I can do to solve the problem. But the part where you cry at night in your bed alone is when there's very little that you can do to help your child feel better. To watch your child feeling terrible because of the side effects of the medication, it's not a nice feeling. To watch your child being criticized or being mistreated by other people because they don't understand what's happening to him, that's not nice. And sometimes other children being mean to him or her, it's actually they can be prone to bullying as well, and so they can also develop their own defense mechanism, which is not always good. But those are all things that make you feel terrible and helpless as a parent, because I think if you're a caring parent, what you'd almost want is for you to have that condition and not for your child to have to deal with it, because they're so young and helpless and they don't understand what's happening to them. They don't understand why the world is not accepting them the way they are, and why they're being compared to another child, etc. So it's that, and then I think being around moms whose children are excelling is probably a very difficult thing, because moms love to talk about how wonderful their children are doing, the straight A's that they're getting, the trophies, the extramurals, all these accomplishments. And when you as a parent can't do the same, it does affect you emotionally and so forth. But I think I've grown over time emotionally and strengthened my stress coping mechanisms, and taking action is actually what's helped me. Instead of sitting back feeling sorry for myself, I just move forward and just try new things, better ways of how to make my child feel supported. And when he's all right, then I'm all right. But it's not easy. So having someone to talk to, I have a coach that I talk to, and I speak to her sometimes once a month and sometimes twice a month, and that's obviously a safe space for me to just express what I'm feeling. And I pray as well. That helps me to cope. And as I said, I have a loving family that is also very understanding. But, it does affect you as a parent. And sometimes you feel like you are inadequate as a parent, or perhaps this child would have fared better if the circumstances were different. So, if they were in a nuclear family where there was two parents, for example, or if they were in the hands of a parent better equipped to deal with this, because as I said, I was quite young when I had my child. So often I would feel like, oh man, why did I have a child at such a young age? Maybe if I waited, I would have been able to deal better with it. But those thoughts actually just don't do any justice. They are just despondent thoughts, and they don't really help the situation. So it's also just trying to keep a positive mindset and feeding yourself with things that uplift you rather than weigh you down. But it's a constant battle, because you can never say you've reached a destination.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ongoing journey. So you always have to be mindful. So if you yourself feel like you're going into a dip, emotionally, it's also just important to be aware of that, and to do things to uplift yourself. So I also find when I'm not eating healthy, or I'm not exercising, or I'm not doing what I'm supposed to for my own well-being, then I'm also not equipped to be able to help him. And so I always just try and also be mindful of those things, so that I can be the best parent that he needs right now. And yeah, I think those are some of my coping mechanisms, but it's not an easy thing to have to deal with, especially when you feel like you're the only one in your friendship circles, or in your social circles, that has to deal with this. And as I said earlier, there are support groups. I personally haven't joined them, just because I haven't had the time, and I have not prioritized that. But there are support groups out there that you can perhaps lean on, and where parents of similar of kids that also have ADHD can provide that support. So
Mm-hmm.
it's quite important to just be aware of your own emotional state, and knowing when to do something about it.
Wow. We appreciate you, Virginie, for sharing your life with us. I mean, I've learned quite a lot today. I thought I knew what ADHD is, only to find that I knew 0.00005% of it. And thank you for your information today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and just a word of encouragement from my side is uh, to all the parents with children with ADHD. I think they are more closer to their children more than parents with, I don't want to say normal children, because I'll be starting to classify them
Yes.
as not normal. But yeah, but I think you guys are more closer to your children, because they need more attention from you. And one thing that you can really appreciate is the bond that you build in between you as a parent and the child. Nothing can take that away from you. And whenever you feel that low, hitting your lowest ebb, just remember, if they were not there in your life would not be the same. You know, you'd
Absolutely.
be doing other things, but not with value that you are able to do with your children. So keep on being strong, and thank you for sharing your experience, and thanks to your child as well for letting you share your experience with him, about him as well. And we do have one of the audience that also has a child with ADHD, and I hope that that also really helped him, from what you just presented there. And thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. All the time when we speak about these engaging topics, we run out of time so very quick. But yeah, I guess that's what makes us want to come back
I
once
mean,
again
yeah.
and have these type of shows. We
Otherwise,
hope that
we
you,
wouldn't be here.
yeah, we hope that you'll come back one day and hopefully not charge us, ne?
Please don't charge us, but we would like to have you again. I
Mm,
mean, after you join the support
yeah,
group, you'll let us know as to, oh no, the support group doesn't work, or it works, to encourage other mothers out there to say, look, I thought I had enough support, but I think the support group is offering me better than what I was getting from my
yeah.
family, from everybody around me. So please do.
Thank you.
And for the parents with children with ADHD, this is for you. Right. This is us signing out from our show. We have these shows every Mondays at 6:30, and we uh, broadcasting on Riverside FM as our main platform. And we also have audience that are connecting on Telegram. We also like to thank you for connecting. We also have Twitter. We won't forget about that. We're streaming live there on Twitter and also on TikTok.
Yes.
And for TikTok, what's your handle, Figile?
It's
At
at
Figile what?
it's at fpp.figile.
At fpp.figile. And this show is being recorded and will be uploaded on YouTube. And the YouTube channel is Get Informed 2. 2 is TOO. So Get Informed 2. So it will be uploaded there. It will also be on podcast, Apple Podcast. It will also be on Spotify, Google Podcasts. So every platform that's available, they will have our show on it. So if you missed the live show, this is where you can catch us. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And this is Naomi Rapedi, your host, and Figile Ngosi, my co-host, and we're signing out.
Thank you.
Amen.